We are back again with On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMAPlay365. I'm your host Newsome, and we're here to talk about UFC Vegas 10 at the Apex in Vegas. We should be having another light heavyweight main event here with Thiago Santos versus Glover Teixeira, which again would have had championship implications, but unfortunately, Glover Teixeira had to pull out of the fight due to a positive COVID-19 test, and the fight has been rescheduled for October 3rd. The UFC promoted the co-main event, so our main event for this card is Michelle Waterson versus Angela Hill, which I know won't please too many people, but when you really break the fight down, it's actually quite an interesting fight. We'll touch upon that very shortly. But just before we get into the breakdowns and moving back onto the topic of COVID-19, last week was just unbelievable. We had bets on Jalen Turner, Alexander Romanov and Bartosz Fabinski. Turner's fight got cancelled about 3 hours before the fights were due to start because Moises tested positive for COVID-19. Then Romanov's fight was cancelled an hour after due to De Lima testing positive for COVID-19. Kevin Natividad also pulled out due to a positive COVID-19 test too. So at this point, we had lost 2 of our official bets. We lost our dog of the week. We lost a parlay leg from both the 3-leg parlays. We lost a full 4-leg parlay. And we lost 7 of the parlay pieces from the Create Your Own section too. It was just a nightmare night. We lost the official bet on Fabinski, but one of the remaining parlays did actually cash. Remember, we have multiple packages on the MMA Play 365 website with UFC betting advice and daily fantasy sports content for DraftKings and FanDuel too. We also have various subscription lengths and options too. So to see our full service list, please go and visit MMAPlay365.com for more information or to sign up today. And let's break down some fights in the main event of the evening. 5 rounds in the women's strawweight division. We've got Michelle Waterson versus Angela Hill. Angela Hill currently the minus 125 favourite. The comeback on Michelle Waterson at plus 105 as the slight underdog. Now, as for where the value is on the betting line, I do think that the value is with the underdog in Michelle Waterson in this spot. I'm not saying she should be a huge favourite, but I think as a pick'em or maybe Waterson as a very slight minus 120 favourite, I think would be a lot more of a fairer betting line. As for where the line moves, it has been fluctuating a little bit. We've seen Angela Hill go up to minus 140. She's come back down to minus 125. So it does seem like when the lines get close, people are betting on Angela Hill. But then when that line gets too wide, then people are betting it back down by betting the other side. So I think we are going to see some fluctuation throughout fight week and on fight night as well. Ultimately, I wouldn't be shocked to see Waterson close at plus 100, maybe minus 105. And maybe it might even hit the pick'em that I think it should be. So that's where I see the line moving. Now, as for how this fight plays out, I really like Angela Hill as a fighter. I don't bet on her every fight, but when I have bet on her, I don't think I've ever lost any money on her. I think she's one of the most underappreciated fighters for sure. She fights all the time. She's an exciting fighter as well. You know, people will say, oh, well, she goes to so many decisions. Listen, she was out there in her last fight dropping Claudia Gadelha. In a fight, by the way, I actually think that she won. She's been fighting in the UFC since 2014. She was an ex-Invicta champion as well. She did go on a bit of a horrible streak in the UFC, but listen, since she dropped the fight against Yan Xiaonan, she's 3-1 in her last 4 fights. The one loss coming to Claudia Gadelha, who we know has been a perennial top contender for pretty much her entire UFC career. And like I say, I think that she actually won that fight as well. So, in my opinion, she should be 4-0 in her last 4, on a 4-fight win streak coming into this fight. It's no surprise that she was the co-main event and the UFC have bumped her up to the main event here. I really like her as a fighter. On the opposite side with Michelle Waterson, it's weird because I've never really been massively high on her as a fighter. But again, she's a fighter that's been fighting at the top of the division, at the highest level in the sport for a long time, and she's fought pretty much all the best women in the division too. So, although I've never been high on her as a fighter, I do respect what she brings to the table. She's got decent karate, the Karate Hottie is a nickname, so that's where that comes from. Good sidekicks, and she's got a really underrated ground game as well. You can see when she gets fighters to the mat, although she's not the biggest for the division, she's got good control down there. She's got good transitioning from position to position. She really loves to have that end goal of getting on her opponent's back. But I suppose the reason I've never been that high on her, like I mentioned before, is because she just looks beatable in regards to her style. She's got that head and arm throw, which is the way that she gets fights to the mat, which, by the way, although that's not the most advised technique in regards to takedowns because it can cause problems when you hit the mat, your opponent can have a great chance of popping that head out and taking your own back. But that head and arm throw actually really works for her. And it's almost like the Ovin St. Preux Von Flu choke situation. Initially, it was a submission that you shouldn't really be completing and submitting opponents with at this level. But OSP has just made it work for him. It's a similar thing with Michelle Waterson and the head and arm throw. It's not a throw that really should be used, but she's become a specialist at it. She really likes it, and that's her way to get fights to the mat, and she can transition from the position she lands in from that throw as well. But I'm actually going to flip the script here. I think this is a very interesting fight stylistically because although both women are extremely well-rounded, both good on the feet, both good on the mat, both good in the clinch, it's essentially going to be Angela Hill who's going to be strongest on the feet with a movement, with a volume. She's going to be able to rack up a lot of volume should this fight go 5 rounds, and that is definitely something that Waterson needs to address because Angela Hill can push nearly 100 significant strikes over 3 rounds, so over 5 rounds we might see her at the 150, 160 mark if Waterson doesn't do anything about it. But then on the flip side, we've got Waterson, who I believe is going to be strongest in the clinch and on the ground as well. So although both women are well-rounded, I do think we're going to see elements of a striker versus grappler here. If this fight is a 5-round kickboxing fight, I think Angela Hill takes it all day. But if Michelle Waterson makes this an MMA fight, looks to clinch up, try and take Hill down, I do think that Waterson's going to have a lot of success, and I think she takes the fight in that scenario. Like I say, I'm flipping the script here. I'm normally high on Angela Hill. I'm normally not so high on Michelle Waterson, but I think stylistically over 5 rounds, Michelle Waterson is going to give herself opportunities to get this fight to the mat. She's going to give herself opportunities to clinch up with Angela Hill, and we saw Waterson actually hopped the back of Joanna Jędrzejczyk in their fight, a fight that she lost comfortably. But halfway through that fight, Waterson managed to get Jędrzejczyk against the cage, hopped her back, and it looked for a moment like she could potentially cause problems for Jędrzejczyk. And I think if that's Angela Hill on the mat and not Jędrzejczyk, I think that fight stays on the mat a little bit longer. I think the probability of Waterson submitting Angela Hill in that scenario is a much higher probability too. So ultimately, I think the biggest gap in skill in this fight is on the mat and in the grappling. And I do think we see some grappling exchanges, which I massively favour Waterson. On the feet, like I say, I do favour Angela Hill. She's got the more volume. I'm not sure her technique is head and shoulders above where Waterson's at, but that volume is really important. But on the feet, I think it's much closer in regards to the gap in skill than it is on the mat. So for that reason, I'm picking Michelle Waterson to win this fight. And in the next fight, I'm so happy that this fight has been promoted to the co-main event because personally, it's my favourite fight on the fight card. It's going to be a really great fight. We've got Ottman Azaitar versus Khama Worthy. Khama Worthy currently the minus 135 favourite. The comeback on Azaitar is the plus 115 underdog. As for where the value is in this fight, I think the value sits with Azaitar at plus 115. Khama Worthy did open up plus money again, but the public have bet Khama Worthy up into a moderately sized favourite, shall we say. I'm not sure about that line movement, and that's ultimately why I think there is value on Azaitar as the underdog. As for where the line moves, again, I think we're going to see some fluctuation. We have seen Azaitar up at plus 125. He's come back down to plus 115. It wouldn't shock me to see a little bit more money coming on him and tighten the lines up closer to fight night. But ultimately on Saturday night, when they get in the cage, I think we are going to see Khama Worthy close as the favourite. Now, as for how this fight plays out, I've touched upon it already. Khama Worthy has opened up quite a sizable underdog in his opening 2 fights in the UFC against Devontae Smith, who he knocked out brutally in round 1. And then against Luis Pena in a fight that was very close. You could argue that he was losing, but then he got the guillotine submission in the 3rd round. Beat Pena as a big underdog as well. So I understand that when he's open plus money again here, that the money has come in on him because he's just proven to be a very profitable underdog. But now we're sitting at the point where he's no longer plus money. He's currently minus 135. And I think there's a lot of recency bias in that line. Listen, I love the Death Star. I think he's a good fighter. I'm just not sure this spot is the one where he should be that moderately sized favourite. I think the line should be a little bit closer, maybe a pick 'em. I think Azaitar is being slightly disrespected here, although, again, I don't know whether it's just recency bias in the line or it's what we've seen in tape of Azaitar that's pushed him to the underdog, which I'll talk about very soon, because there is some definite concerns on Azaitar for sure. But as for Khama, he seems to be pretty good everywhere. Yes, he was taken down a couple of times by Pena, so that wrestling defense might not be the best, but he's a good striker. He's got good technique. He's constantly on his toes. He's got good cardio as well, which helps that movement throughout the rounds. His activity and volume is really good, and obviously he has that knockout power as well that we saw against Devontae Smith in combinations. So Khama as a fighter is a really good fighter. But listen, so's Ottman Azaitar. Azaitar is definitely not as technical as Khama. Azaitar doesn't have that crisp striking that Khama has, but what Azaitar does have is aggression, pressure, and honestly, his power is so deceptive. It's like he's got missiles in either hand. It's like when he cracks his opponents, they just drop. And his punches that don't even look like they've got too much behind them, but it's the accuracy of where it lands, and like I say, that deceptive power that puts them out. He's so hard to shrug off you. And in this small cage, I feel that Azaitar is really going to thrive because he is a little bit smaller than Khama. He's quite small for the division anyway, so he's constantly trying to close that distance, get into boxing range, and let fire with that power that he's got in his hands. In a smaller cage, he doesn't have as much work to do to close the distance, so that's something to take into consideration. Now, my concerns around Azaitar is when you go back and you watch his tape. I think I've watched his career now twice. He gets dropped a lot, and that's definitely a concern here because if he's coming in hot, if he's coming in hard, comes out like a bull. I mean, they call him the bulldozer for a reason. And Khama catches him coming in, uses Azaitar's forward pressure against him to make his own punches land harder, then we could see a situation where Azaitar is dropped. And in the UFC, in MMA, if someone's dropped in a round, that round is usually scored against them regardless of whatever has happened previously in that round or happens after that moment in that round as well. So that's definitely a concern. But as for actually knocking Azaitar out, the dude's undefeated for a reason. His recoverability is great. He can get straight back up. I've seen him get knocked down, come back up. He's looked a little wobbly. He's had a barrage of attacks against him whilst he's still dazed, and he's still come back from that. So his recoverability is really good. But the fact that he gets dropped is the concern because that's a round loss automatically, unless you go out there and drop your opponent right afterwards. But in regards to who I think wins this fight, I do think Azaitar is going to win. I think the forward pressure against Khama is going to take away that technical ability of Worthy a little bit on the feet. So Worthy does like space. He likes time to think and to pick his shots and to make his reads. But Azaitar just doesn't give his opponents that sort of time and that sort of room. He'll be in his face constantly for the majority of the fight as long as he can be, and I just don't trust that Khama can eat one of those shots from Azaitar. If Azaitar lands on him, don't be surprised to see Khama drop. And on the flip side, I'm not going to be totally shocked to see Azaitar dropped either. I just think that Azaitar does have the power to finish the fight. I think the likelihood of him finishing is slightly greater than the likelihood of Khama finishing. If it goes to a decision, I think the volume, the pressure, the aggression from Azaitar is going to look better in the judges' eyes. But like I say, the one notch on that is if he gets dropped in a round and he can't drop Khama afterwards in that round, then it's not going to look great for him and he could lose rounds that way. But ultimately, I think Azaitar has got more paths to victory. I think stylistically this favours him because his aggression should take away the biggest threat from Khama, the biggest skill set, which is that technique in the punches and the quick movement in and out of range. So for that reason, I'm picking Ottman Azaitar to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Roxanne Modafferi versus Andrea Lee. Lee is currently the minus 320 favourite with the comeback on Modafferi at plus 260. Now, as for where the value is in this fight, I do think even though the line is very high on Lee, although she's a big favourite, I do think that the value still sits with her. Probably not something that you're going to play straight, but I certainly think that she's a good parlay piece here, because ultimately I do see Roxanne Modafferi struggling in this fight overall, which I'll touch upon very soon. As for where the line moves, it wouldn't shock me to see some money coming in on Modafferi. She's been proven to be a good underdog at times. Antonina Shevchenko and Macy Barber come to my mind instantly, so I wouldn't be shocked to see that money coming in on Modafferi, but ultimately if this line does move a few cents come fight night, I do think that we'll see that coming on Andrea Lee. I think Lee will probably close roughly where she's at right about now. It might hit minus 340, minus 350 come fight night, but I can't see it moving too much further than that. As for how this fight plays out, I do think that Andrea Lee has all bases covered here against Modafferi. I think she's the better striker. I think she's the better fighter in the clinch. I think she's the better wrestler. She might even be the slightly better grappler as well, but she's going to be the fighter that's sharper, cleaner, the fighter that's probably got more cardio, the fighter that is likely to be stronger inside the cage as well. And I'm just really struggling to see Modafferi win this fight. In regards to the striking of Andrea Lee, I think she's the more aggressive striker. I think she's the striker with more volume. She's the striker that mixes it up as well. So she's got a nice jab. She's got good combinations with her hands, but she'll also mix in kicks as well. She's got a bit of flash about her with some spin back kicks to the body. She's got decent wrestling, opportunistic wrestling, so when she sees an opening, she'll take it. She's got good grappling as well, topside, so that's really underrated. I think for Modafferi to win this fight, she's got to close the distance, get a hold of Lee, and put Lee on her back and work on top, spend time on top, win rounds that way, potentially try and look for a submission down there as well, because that is where Modafferi is strongest in her own game. But I think that's easier said than done. The first problem Modafferi is going to have is closing the distance. I think if she tries to be aggressive and come forward, I think she's going to get cracked with some hard shots from Andrea Lee. I think that Andrea Lee could potentially hurt her in that scenario as well. But if she does get past those strikes, get close, I think Andrea Lee's better in the clinch, as I've already mentioned. Also, as I've already mentioned, I think Lee will be stronger as well. So I think that'll be a task, closing the distance and getting her down to the mat. And then if she does get Lee down to the mat, holding her down is also going to be difficult. Lee won't just lay there on her back and accept it. She'll be looking to scoot back to the cage, stand back up, get back up to her feet, break away, exit and go again. I think the gap in skill in the striking in this fight is going to be absolutely apparent. Modafferi has issues with her vision as well. She says that she doesn't see all that well inside the cage, which is also a huge disadvantage. So coupling that with the advantage that Andrea Lee is going to have in the striking on the feet, I think it's going to be a bad night for Modafferi. I think it's a really large mountain for her to climb, a task that's going to be difficult, and ultimately I don't think she'll get it done on the night. So I'm picking Andrea Lee to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Ed Herman versus Mike Rodriguez, a fight that was put together not so long ago. We've got Mike Rodriguez currently the minus 255 favourite. The comeback on Ed Herman at plus 215 is the underdog. As for where the value is in this fight, I don't think that there's much value at all for where the betting lines are at right now. The reason being is because I think Mike Rodriguez is definitely the rightful favourite. But then if you're playing Mike Rodriguez, you're playing a minus 255 line. So can you have that sort of trust in Mike Rodriguez? I'm not too sure. But on the same token, I don't think that there's going to be many people rushing to the betting window to take a plus 215 line on Ed Herman either, because I do think that he loses this fight. As for where the line moves, I don't think it's going to move too far where we're at right about now. I could make an argument for Mike Rodriguez coming down to maybe minus 240, minus 230 at the lowest, but then I could also make an argument for him getting bet to minus 270, minus 275. Ultimately, I don't think it's going to be too far from where we're at right about now. Now, as for how this fight plays out, Ed Herman's a really interesting case because not so long ago he was on a 3-fight losing streak, losing to Nikita Krylov, which isn't a bad loss, but then after that taking back-to-back losses against CB Dollaway and Jean Vellante. That's not a good look. But then he comes out there against Patrick Cummins and knocks him out in round 1, which is quite impressive because although Cummins was the type of fighter that you could definitely drop in a fight, the dude was durable and not many people could actually get Cummins out of there and knock him out. So the fact that Herman did that was quite a big surprise in my opinion. Then he goes out there against Khadis Ibragimov as the underdog again, and he beats Ibragimov over 3 rounds in Russia as well. So now Ed Herman is riding a 2-fight win streak. I think that's a little bit deceptive of how this fight plays out though, because Pat Cummins, yes, it was quite a surprising win, but considering that Cummins does get dropped in most fights, someone was eventually going to put him out. Herman was that somebody. Ibragimov, we know, starts fast, fades late. Obviously, that's where Herman used his veteran experience to win the fight. Here against Mike Rodriguez, it's a little bit different. Mike Rodriguez, coming off that nice first round win against Marcin Prachnio only a couple of weeks ago, he's back in the cage again. The dude is just more athletic than Herman. I think he's got more power than Herman. I think he's more explosive than Herman. Herman's path to victory for me would actually be to try and close the distance and get Rodriguez on his back, because that's where Rodriguez is weakest for sure. But I think whether Herman's coming in to close the distance to strike or close the distance to tie up, he's going to get hit by some hard shots with Rodriguez. Rodriguez has got nasty kicks as well. He's very long for the division in regards to his limbs, so he's got power in his jab, he's got power in his cross, he's got power in his combinations, and like I say, he'll kick up and down the body as well. I just don't think that Herman is going to survive a barrage of attacks from Mike Rodriguez in this fight. He might be okay early on, but I don't see a scenario where Rodriguez doesn't crack him hard and clean. And when he does, I'm not saying it's going to put Herman straight out, but it'll either wobble Herman, daze him, or it'll wake Herman up and make him realise that there's actually a lot of power coming at him from his opponent. That could make him hesitant. It'll allow Rodriguez to push on in that scenario. So I think the power of Mike Rodriguez is ultimately going to win him this fight, whether it be just making Ed Herman hesitant or just putting Ed Herman out. I do think that if this fight goes late, that it could be very sketchy for Mike Rodriguez, especially if Herman can land takedowns as well. But ultimately, I do think Rodriguez will stay vertical. I think he'll land the harder shots, the shots that will decide the winner of the fight. So I'm picking Mike Rodriguez to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Billy Quarantillo versus Kyle Nelson. Quarantillo currently the minus 255 favourite. The comeback on Nelson at plus 215 as the underdog. As for where the value is in this fight, very similar to what I just explained in the last fight. I don't see too much value where we're at right about now. The reason being exactly the same. I think Quarantillo's the rightful favourite in this fight, but a gameplay minus 255, it's very chalky for the fight that I think we're going to get in this fight. But on the same token, I don't think that Kyle Nelson is the best bet at plus 215, even though that is a juicy underdog line. As for where the line moves, I think it's going to tighten up come fight night. I just think it's too wide at this point. I could see Kyle Nelson dropping under plus 200. We might see him at plus 190, maybe plus 185. Obviously, that'll reduce the line on Quarantillo as well. And we might even see Quarantillo drop to the minus 225 line himself. As for how this fight plays out, I am wondering what Billy Quarantillo is going to look like in this fight after that war against Spike Carlisle. A fight where I actually didn't think that he won personally. And I'm pretty sure somebody told me at the time that as that decision was about to be read out, Spike Carlisle was minus 700 live as well. Yet Quarantillo took the decision. So make of that what you will. But Quarantillo does have some good skills everywhere. He's a decent striker. He's active. He'll apply volume. He's got takedowns himself. He's a good defensive wrestler also. When he's on the mat, he's a very good grappler, especially topside. If he gets on top of Kyle Nelson, I think he can really go to work on him. But on the flip side with Kyle Nelson has got power in his hands. I don't think that he's an overly special fighter, but the guy has got skills in his boxing, in his hands, and he can land that power. If he lands that power on Billy Quarantillo, I think he could definitely knock him out. It's just for Kyle Nelson, that window of opportunity is relatively small, and that also makes the likelihood of him winning this fight, the percentage likelihood, very small as well. So that's why I do think Billy Q is the rightful favourite. I think Billy Q is going to have that game plan of coming out, taking him down, trying to get on top of him. If he can get on top of Kyle Nelson before Kyle Nelson lands a hard punch on his chin, then that's where I think Billy Q is going to grow in this fight, because by the time that Kyle Nelson gets back up to his feet, if he's not finished or if he can get back up to his feet, I think he'll be tired. That power in his hands will be deteriorated a little bit as well, and at that point he won't be as dangerous. That'll allow Billy Q to grow in the fight and keep pushing with that game plan. He might even be able to feel comfortable striking
if Kyle Nelson gets tired from being taken down and worked on the mat as well. So I think Billy Q's got more paths to victory here. He's definitely got to be careful, specifically early on, because Kyle Nelson can knock you out. Even though both of these fighters produce some extremely exciting fights, I'm not totally sold on either of them at this point, but I do think that Billy Quarantillo is the better fighter technically. I think he's the fighter with more paths to victory here. So I'm picking Billy Quarantillo to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Matt Schnell versus Tyson Nam. Tyson Nam is the current minus 125 favourite. The comeback on Matt Schnell is plus 105 as the underdog. This betting line's really interesting because Matt Schnell actually opened a minus 165 favourite. All the money came back in on the other side on Tyson Nam, pushed Tyson Nam to the favourite. The line has flipped. And as it stands right now, I think the value is with Matt Schnell at plus money. As for where the line moves, I think that we are going to see some fluctuation. I know I've said that a lot on this card, but I think we've got a lot of fights where we're going to have strong opinions on either side from the public, and this is one of those fights for sure. I think Matt Schnell will see come back to minus money at some point. I'm not sure who's actually going to close the favourite in this fight. As it stands right now, I would probably take an educated guess at Tyson Nam closing the favourite, just purely because I don't think that he should be a minus 125 favourite. So the fact he is must mean that there's a lot of love for him out there. As for how this fight plays out, I think Matt Schnell is the better fighter in this fight. I think he's the more well-rounded fighter. I think he's the better striker. He's the better grappler. He's the better wrestler. I think he's the quicker fighter. I think he's going to be the fighter with more volume, more activity, better movement. The problem that I've got in this fight, though, is Tyson Nam has undeniable power. We saw that in his last fight not too long ago against Zaruk Adeshev. He flatlined Adeshev really badly. It was very early on in the fight. Adeshev, though, something to quickly mention about that fight, and not many people are going to know this. I actually wrote a breakdown for Adeshev. I was ready to bet him in that fight. However, what I was waiting for is what sort of shape Adeshev was going to come in, because he was fighting super short notice, UFC debut, upper weight class, but ultimately Adeshev missed weight. He looked in a horrible physical condition, which I thought he was going to be anyway, because I saw a picture on Instagram of what he looked like a couple of days before the weigh-ins, and then I looked back to his previous pictures on Instagram of what he looks like normally in camp down that weight class, and the difference was just so striking. Ultimately, that's why I didn't bet him, because when he stepped on the scales, he was heavy, he didn't look in great shape at all. Now, I'm not taking anything away from Tyson Nam, because that knockout was beautiful. But I just think that if he can't land that knockout blow on Matt Schnell, I think Schnell could try and take him to the mat, try and work him on the mat. Or if he can't do that, or if he doesn't want to have that sort of game plan, I think Schnell could keep it on the feet. I think his movement's a little better. He's got really, really quick hands, and he throws in combination as well. It's just like I've already mentioned, the huge concerns for Schnell in this fight is the fact that he has been knocked out before. He does get wobbled in fights. He can come forward recklessly at times and enter himself into a wall like he did last time out against Alexandre Pantoja. If he gets himself into a war in this fight against Tyson Nam, stands in the pocket and lets Nam unload shots on him whilst he's unloading on Nam, I think that Nam will have a very good chance of knocking Schnell out in that sort of fight, in that scenario. So that's the only real notch I have on Matt Schnell as a fighter. If he fights this fight smart, stays at range, or as much range as he can, with this being the small cage, I do think that the speed, the movement, and the volume is going to be enough to overwhelm Tyson Nam. Tyson Nam's been beaten by Sergio Pettis, who at the time, we thought that was a difficult fight for Tyson Nam, but since Pettis has been released from the UFC, he lost comfortably against Kai Kara France as well. Again, Kai Kara France has looked good in other fights, but recently it hasn't looked as impressive, so I'm not sure how much of a bad loss that is for Tyson Nam. Matt Schnell, in my opinion, isn't that far off from being in that same bracket as your Sergio Pettis and your Kai Kara France at this point. So I think that he's got a stylistic advantage on the feet in regards to technique. I think he's got more paths to victory because Schnell's wrestling and his grappling's really underrated as well. It's just a big concern that if he enters a brawl, or if he just gets cracked by a hard shot coming from Nam, that could be all she wrote. In effect, it is a puncher's chance for Tyson Nam, but it's a puncher's chance that's got a high percentage likelihood of happening. But with that said, I do have to favour the fighter that I believe has got more paths to victory. I do have to favour the fighter who I think technically is better than his opponent. So for those reasons, I'm picking Matt Schnell to win this fight. And in the next fight, this was a fight that was pulled together not so long ago. We've got Julia Avila versus Sijara Eubanks. Avila currently the minus 310 favourite. The comeback on Eubanks at plus 255 as the underdog. As for where the value is in this fight, I do think, again, like I said with Andrea Lee and Roxanne Modafferi, even though Avila is a decent-sized favourite in this fight at minus 310, I do see some value on her, again, potentially from a parlay piece perspective, because it's not something that you're likely going to play straight. But I do think Avila is going to have a lot of success in this fight. As for where the line moves, I wouldn't be shocked to see some money coming back in on Eubanks because she is a name. She is a fighter that isn't the type of fighters that Avila's been beaten. She is much better than those past opponents, and she's got more experience as well. She's mixed it up with some of the best fighters in the division. So ultimately, it wouldn't shock me if more money came back in on Eubanks. Obviously, that would shorten Avila down to potentially minus 275, minus 280. That sort of line wouldn't surprise me. But ultimately, I don't think it's going to drift too far away from where we're at right about now. Now, as for how this fight plays out, I think Eubanks is definitely going to come out strong in this fight. She's always got a good round and a half in her. It's just with Eubanks, she fades, she tires late in fights. And Avila can go all 3 rounds hard if she needs to. She can keep the same pace in round 3 that she started with in round 1. And that's a really big problem for Eubanks because even if Eubanks hypothetically takes that first round, she might start well in the second round. But Avila will finish that second round strong and she'll have her moments in that second round as well early on. So it's not as if Eubanks is definitely going to go out here, win round 1, win round 2, fade round 3, but take a 29-28. I think it's going to be one of those fights that even in the first round, it's going to be close. I don't think the first round is going to be a given for Eubanks. I think that'll be a best round, but that doesn't necessarily mean that she's going to win it. She could easily get 30-27 in this fight. The point is, if Eubanks does start really well, wins that first round, the second round is going to be a toss-up. But I think Avila is going to be live for that second round anyway. And I think the third round is definitely going to go to Avila in this fight, should the fight go on this long. I don't see Sijara Eubanks winning a third round. That means she has to win the first 2 rounds. And I think it's a big ask for her to do that in this fight. Yes, she's got good abilities. She's got good boxing. She's got good combinations. She's got good takedowns. She's got decent top control as well. We've seen a really all-rounded game, a well-rounded game from Sijara Eubanks. It's just with Avila, she's so aggressive. She's packed full of energy, packed full of volume. And like I say, she can do that for 15 minutes straight. Whereas Sijara Eubanks historically fades in pretty much every fight that goes the distance. For that reason, I can't pick Sijara Eubanks to win this fight. I think Avila is just going to be too much for her on the night. She's going to be packed full of energy, packed full of activity, packed full of volume. She's the fighter that's more likely to win a decision. She's a fighter that's more likely to find the finish over the 3 rounds. So for that reason, I'm picking Julia Avila to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a fight that it seems like it's got a lot of people split on either side too. We've got Matt Frevola versus Roosevelt Roberts, a fight which I believe both fighters called for as well. We've got Roosevelt Roberts, currently the minus 115 favourite. The comeback on Matt Frevola, the slight minus 105 underdog. Now, as for where the value is on this fight, the lines are that close that if you've got a really good read on the fight, it's definitely bettable either side with the lines being very short. So with that good read, either side's playable for sure. As for where the line moves, this is anybody's guess at this point because we've seen Roosevelt Roberts at minus 105. We've seen him at minus 125. The lines are fluctuating by the hours, by the days. We've seen Matt Frevola at plus money. Now he's minus money. So this could really shift anywhere in my opinion. Ultimately though, I'd actually line this not so far off a pick'em. So for that reason, I think it will stay relatively close between the fighters through fight week and then leading into fight night as well. Now, as for how this fight plays out, it's a really, really interesting fight stylistically and considering the physical differences in this fight as well. In his last two fights, Matt Frevola has fought two really tall guys for the division, and the same applies here for Roosevelt Roberts. He's fought Jalen Turner, Luis Pena, and now he's got another really tall fighter in Roosevelt Roberts. So looking historically at how Matt Frevola has performed against other tall fighters, he's looked pretty good, but they weren't easy fights for him. Jalen Turner was a unanimous decision. I don't think there was any argument in that decision there either, but he still had moments in that fight where he couldn't get Turner down. Turner was looking really good. I broke that fight down a little bit last week when we bet on Jalen Turner, but then against Luis Pena, the fight was much closer. This is a fight where I didn't honestly think Frevola won that fight. I thought Pena did do enough to take that win. It was a split decision win for Frevola, not for Pena. So it wasn't a robbery, but it was a fight that I thought should have gone the other way for sure. The thing is, Matt Frevola's got this explosive takedown game. He comes forward throwing bombs with his hands. He throws high kicks as well. He can hit the head of these tall guys also, which is pretty interesting. But he's got a good kickboxing game and he's got an explosive wrestling game and he mixes it in really well. The problem is, in these fights, he's always going to get pot shotted by the taller guys with the straight punches. We saw that in the Pena fight. Sure, he landed strikes on Pena. It wasn't a one-way fight on the feet. He was aggressive, moving forward into range and landing strikes. The thing is with Roosevelt Roberts, he's more defensively aware than Luis Pena. He's much better on the counter. His boxing's crisper as well. So where Pena was getting hit, I don't think that Roberts gets hit as much in this fight as what Pena got hit in his fight against Matt Frevola. I think that Roberts is also going to pour more volume on Matt Frevola than what both Luis Pena and Jalen Turner did. Now, this might make Frevola start shooting more takedowns than he did in those last two fights as well. I do think that he can get Roosevelt Roberts down. Roosevelt Roberts' takedown defense has got to be better because at the minute, as much of a prospect as I think he is, that's his real hole in his game. Now, he does have good chokes, front chokes, Bravo chokes, guillotine chokes. Once he gets his arms locked under the neck of his opponent, it's very, very tough for his opponent to get out of that grip. And because Roberts has got relatively thin arms, those chokes are much harsher as well. So he's got really good chokes. And he does use that to help him defend takedowns, to try and help him reverse position as well. It could work in this fight. If Frevola shoots in, leaves his neck exposed, he could either get swept with that guillotine threat, or he could even just finish the choke and submit Frevola. I do think Frevola's going to get Roberts down a couple of times, but ultimately, even if it's 3 or 4 times in this fight, I just don't think that Frevola's going to do enough on top for it to affect a decision should it get there. So when I'm looking at this fight, I'm seeing the physical advantages for Roberts in regards to his height and his length. I'm seeing advantages in the striking for sure from a technical perspective, from a volume perspective. I do think that Roberts is going to get taken down, but I think he's got techniques to improve positions, get back to his feet, or even finish Frevola on the mat as well with a submission. So when I'm looking at the bigger picture of this fight, I just think that Roberts has got more paths to victory. I think he is a fighter with the much higher ceiling, and for those reasons, I'm going to pick Roosevelt Roberts to win this fight. In the next fight, we've got a fight that's been put together not so long ago. Again, seems to be another current theme with this event. We've got Bobby Green versus Alan Patrick. Bobby Green currently the minus 245 favourite. The comeback on Patrick at plus 205 as the underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, I do think that all the value sits with the underdog here at plus 205. I think the line is way too wide in this fight when you consider the fight stylistically and when you consider that Bobby Green's taking his third fight in only a few months. I've got no issues with Bobby Green here being the favourite. He opened as a minus 185 favourite. Patrick opened at plus 145. I think that line is much closer to where I believe the line should be. It's just gone too far the other way for me. As for where the line moves, I would assume that money would come back in on Patrick just because the line is so wide, but it does seem right now that more money is coming in on Bobby Green. I ultimately don't think it's going to close too far off from where we're at right about now. We might see Alan Patrick at best plus 190, plus 195. I don't think he'll be any better than that once the two fighters step in the cage on Saturday night. As for how this fight plays out, though, Bobby Green's been on a nice little run lately. Again, he was one of those fighters I think a few people were writing off not so long ago. The two losses that he's had lately are both losses that I actually thought he won those fights against Drakkar Klose and Francisco Trinaldo. I do believe that right now he should be on a 5-fight win streak, with those fights being Eric Koch, Drakkar Klose, Francisco Trinaldo, Clay Guida and Lando Venata. And Bobby Green has been looking good. You can't take that away from him. The reason why I'm favouring Alan Patrick in this fight, though, is because I don't think Bobby Green has fought anybody like Alan Patrick in his career, which is crazy because he's had 37 fights and I don't think he's ever seen a relentless takedown specialist like Alan Patrick. The closest you're probably going to get is maybe Drakkar Klose for that grinding type of wrestling that Patrick's going to bring to the cage. But even then, I think you're clutching at straws. And it's a fight that was very close anyway, and a fight that the judges thought that Bobby Green lost. So when you're considering Alan Patrick and what he brings to the cage, honestly, I just don't see the justification on the betting line at all. Patrick, it's very obvious what he brings to the table. He's got a very unorthodox striking style, a bit of capoeira in there, but ultimately his goal is to close the distance, score takedowns, grind his opponents, spend as much time as he can on top or as much time in dominant positions against the cage in the clinch. And ultimately, that's what he's going to look to do in this fight. Now, where Patrick comes unstuck, he's lost 2 fights in his career. One to Mairbek Taisumov, forward pressure, aggressive fighter, doesn't take a step backwards. And in his last fight, he lost against Scott Holtzman, a forward pressure, aggressive fighter that doesn't take a step backwards. Patrick really struggles against these guys. He's got to be the one that's pushing his opponent backwards. And that stylistically is where I feel he's going to have some advantages in this fight, because we saw in the Clay Guida and Bobby Green fight, Bobby Green can be backed up. Clay Guida was rushing in on him, pushing forward, being aggressive. It was pushing Bobby Green back and it was allowing Guida to get in on takedowns. He did only complete 3 of them. Bobby Green did stuff a lot of takedowns. He has got good defensive wrestling. He hits a nice switch as well, which can reverse positions for him against the cage whilst his opponent's trying to take him down. So Bobby Green's not going to get whitewashed here in regards to wrestling. But the fact that Bobby Green can be pushed back, to me, indicates that Alan Patrick is going to have a lot of opportunities in this fight to stall against the cage. I think he's going to be bigger and stronger than Green as well, so that's going to be an advantage in the clinch. And he's going to have opportunities to take Green down. He's not going to keep Green down for long periods in this fight, but we could see one of those types of fights where Patrick's scoring 7, 8 or 9 takedowns here, which, even if Green does have advantages on the feet, does have success, which I think he will, whilst they're both standing at range, I think Green will be the better striker. I just think that the relentlessness of Patrick, the takedowns that I believe is going to land, is probably going to sway the judges to score the fight to him opposed to Bobby Green. I don't see there being a finish in this fight, not really. I do see it going to a decision, and the judges are going to have a decision to make with potentially a lot of takedowns to score and volume on the other side coming from Green. Green's also not the type of fighter to become hesitant if he's getting taken down a lot, which means that he'll probably get taken down more as well. Like I say, stylistically, I do think the fight favours Patrick. I also don't like that Bobby Green's on Instagram saying this is his 3rd fight in 3 months and he's feeling burnt out. Alan Patrick isn't the type of fighter you want to be fighting on short notice if you're feeling burnt out. I do think that Bobby Green could win a decision if he is constantly standing up from these takedowns and landing enough volume of strikes before that next wave of pressure and takedown comes. But ultimately, I think if Patrick is landing a high number of takedowns, he is probably going to be scoring a lot of control time, be spending a little bit of time on top, and the judges will probably favour that. So I'm going to pick Alan Patrick to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a fun fight ahead of us here. We've got Brok Weaver versus Frank the Crank Camacho. We've got Camacho, currently the -225 favourite. The comeback on Weaver at +185 as the underdog. As for where the value lies in this fight, again, I think the value lies with the underdog. I think the line is way too wide. I completely understand Frank Camacho being the favourite here for sure, but ultimately I don't think that Brok Weaver should be in this region of +185, and I'll explain why shortly. But as for where the line moves, I do think that we're going to see money coming in on Camacho at -225. I think that people are going to like Camacho in parlays because he's the type of line where you're not going to get a great return playing it straight, but adding a -225 to a 2 or 3 leg parlay is going to boost that parlay for sure. So because of that, the parlay money, I think we'll see some more money coming in on Frank Camacho. He might close the fight at -250, -260. Now, as for how this fight plays out, I love Frank Camacho. I'm a big fan of him. He's great to watch inside the cage. He's an entertaining fighter. He sounds like he's a really cool dude outside the cage as well, the type of dude you'd love to grab a beer with. I think he's a little bit of a supporter of MMAPlay365 as well. He comments on a few of our things on Instagram and likes our posts and things like that. So the dude just is a really, really good dude, and he's a really fun fighter. He leaves it all inside the cage. So I really like Camacho. But ultimately, when you look at Camacho's record inside the UFC, he is only 2-5. His wins have come against Nick Hine, who retired after that fight. Damian Brown was the other win. He was sort of coming to the end of his UFC career as well. So I'm not trying to discredit those wins, but in the bigger picture, he is 2-5 in the UFC. He's lost to some good fighters as well. Li Jingliang, Drew Dober, Jeff Neal, Benil Dariush. But the last fight against Justin James was a fight that I really didn't expect someone like Frank Camacho to be losing to. And it wasn't the type of fight where Camacho was completely dominating him and then he just got caught. That sort of stuff does happen. You can make a pass and make an excuse for that. But that was a fight where a fighter made his UFC debut on about 2 days' notice and was having success and then finished to win the first round. It's not a good look. And then we move on to Brok Weaver. You know, he's not had the best start in the UFC either. He made his debut against Kazula Vargas, who Vargas actually got DQ'd with an illegal knee. But Vargas was actually on top of Weaver and was landing some strikes before that happened as well. So although Weaver got that win via DQ, it wasn't the best look either. And then Roosevelt Roberts beat him just a few weeks ago, dominated him, then finished him. Again, it wasn't a good look. So both fighters are actually coming into this fight really needing a win, to be honest. And it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out. The thing is with Camacho, his volume can be good, but when it's good, it means he's fighting a reckless fight, coming forward and winging bombs and trying to get his opponent out of there. I'm not saying that Frank Camacho has got a puncher's chance only in this fight. I do think that there's a possibility he could win a decision, but I feel that if this fight goes to a decision, you've got to ask yourself why. And the first thing that I think of, it's because Camacho didn't knock him out. Why didn't he knock him out? The thing is with Brok Weaver, he's a good boxer himself. He's a southpaw. He'll throw combinations. He's got good cardio. He'll remain active. He will push forward in this fight. But when he gets so close, especially with the heat that I think Camacho's going to bring with his punches, I think Weaver's going to tie up with Camacho, push him back to the cage. Weaver's got a really good tie-up game. This is great for Weaver because he can stay in dominant positions against the cage. He can run that clock down a little bit, land enough strikes so the referee doesn't split them. But if the referee does split them, again, he's got good boxing at range and he can close that distance all the way in again. I think he's going to have physical advantages over Camacho. He's going to be taller. I think he's going to be stronger when they tie up as well. And that could be a key factor in this fight. If Camacho doesn't knock Weaver out, I think Weaver is going to land more volume at range, and I think if he comes all the way in, he's going to have success tying up inside the clinch as well. I think that, as I've already mentioned, the line is quite wide for what Weaver can bring to the table in this fight. Weaver could certainly get knocked out by Camacho, that wouldn't shock me, but I think from a volume perspective, and if a fighter decides to grind this fight out, I'd favour that to be Weaver as well. I think Weaver's got slightly more paths to victory in this fight. I'm going to pick Brok Weaver to win the fight. And in the next fight, we've got Bryan Barberena versus the returning Anthony Ivy. Bryan Barberena, currently the -275 favourite. The comeback on Ivy at +235 as the underdog. As for where the value is in this fight, again, I think the values with the underdog with Ivy. I've got no issue once again with Bryan Barberena being the favourite in this fight. He should rightly be the favourite, but I think it's gone too far the opposite way. I don't think Ivy should be out at plus 235. I think he poses more threats than what the bookies are anticipating for sure. A little recency bias on the line as well, with Ivy being knocked out not so long ago by Christian Aguilera only a few weeks ago. As for where the line moves, I do think that we're going to see more money coming on Bryan Barberena. Again, like I've explained previously in the podcast, I think at minus 275, people might see Bryan Barberena as a good parlay piece in this fight. Because, as I've already mentioned as well, there's not going to be a ton of return playing it straight, but at minus 275, it can really increase the overall line, the combined line of a parlay. As for how this fight plays out, though, I do definitely have some concerns with Anthony Ivy. I am concerned that if he's pushed back, if his opponent's putting pressure on and landing a barrage of strikes, that he might crumble again. Admittedly, Aguilera did just catch him and then hit him with 2 or 3 really hard right hands before the referee stopped the fight, but it does worry me if Barberena pushes forward and he's aggressive like he was in the Luque fight, typically how he is as a fighter in general. Can Anthony Ivy survive that pressure and survive those shots and deliver something back, or weather the storm and deliver something back? So that is the real concern for Ivy. But Ivy is athletic, he's physically gifted, he's got good takedowns, his jiu-jitsu is good as well. I did have one notch on that the last time I broke his fight down in regards to him giving up really good positions and allowing his opponents to stand back up, but he's got decent takedowns. Once he's in on a double leg, he does look to complete them, and he does look to complete them often as well. And I think that's where his path to victory is here. If Bryan Barberena's coming forward hard, try and tie up with him, try and turn him against the cage. I think Ivy is going to be the more physical fighter inside the cage, so use that strength, turn Barberena against the cage, look to take him down. Barberena, I'd imagine, isn't going to get pinned down for too long with the positional mistakes that Ivy can make. But if Ivy's doing this 2 or 3 times, it's going to wear on Barberena. Barberena, I believe, has got quite a sizable weight cut ahead of him. That could be really tough. So if Ivy can just take Barberena down 2 or 3 times over a short period of time, it might zap some of that energy. If Barberena gets tired in this fight, Ivy is going to have a lot of success. For me, though, it's just a case of, can Ivy get Barberena tired before Barberena applies a barrage of combinations on Ivy against the cage? Does the referee not like what he's seeing? Does he stop it? If Ivy can get past that and really utilize his own skill set and apply that game plan, I think that Ivy's got a good chance of winning this fight. And for me, that's the reason why Ivy shouldn't be out at plus 235. It's very possible that Bryan Barberena uses his veteran experience, uses his own stylistic advantages of closing the distance and applying so much pressure on Ivy that he can't take it. But I'm actually siding with the underdog here. I think Ivy can weather that storm from Barberena. I think he can get Barberena tired. Once Barberena's tired, I think Ivy's going to have success. I'm picking Anthony Ivy to win this fight. And in the last fight of the breakdown, we've got Sabina Mazo versus Justine Kish. Mazo currently the minus 245 favourite. The comeback on Kish at plus 205 as the underdog. As for where the value is in this fight, I don't think there's too much value either side, to be honest. It's one of those fights that we've had a couple of times already in this breakdown. I think Mazo is the rightful favourite, but at minus 245, I think she's too big of a favourite. But on the flip side, I don't think there's going to be many people rushing to the betting window to take the plus 205 on Justine Kish either. As for where the line moves, I do think it's going to close up a little bit. It wouldn't shock me to see Sabina Mazo at minus 225, minus 210, maybe even minus 200. I do think the money will come in on Kish the closer we get to fight night. But as for how this fight plays out, I really can't look past Mazo in this fight because she's a fighter that had a rough start on her debut but has looked great ever since. She's with Master Rafael Cordero at King's MMA, and because she's so young, she's making huge strides in development each time out as well. So I really struggle to fade fighters that are making those sort of developments and they're improving each time out and looking better each time out, because ultimately we're going to see a better version of Sabina Mazo inside the cage, or at least we're very likely to anyway. The thing is with Mazo, although the decision win against JJ Aldrich in her last fight was a split decision, I do think that she rightfully won that fight. And anybody that's beaten JJ Aldrich for me has got substance about them in this division. JJ Aldrich isn't a fighter that's ever going to challenge for the title in the UFC, but she's certainly a fighter that's going to keep the lower tier fighters in the division away from the upper tier fighters of the division. I think that's a good win for Sabina Mazo. As for Justine Kish, she won her last fight against Lucy Pudilova. She was the betting underdog in that fight, so a little bit of an upset there. But prior to that, she lost back-to-back fights against Felice Herrig, Ji Yong Kim. The decision against Ashley Yoder was very questionable as well. So her run in the UFC hasn't been totally clean. I just think that although this fight should actually be quite exciting with Justine Kish having an 18-2 kickboxing record, Mazo is very aggressive on the feet as well. I just think that Mazo can mix it up on the mat as well. Although Justine Kish has got takedowns, I think Mazo is going to be the fighter that wants to fight longer, stay at range, land from the outside. But when they both get in close, I wouldn't be surprised to see Mazo try and take Kish down and put Kish on her back. It wouldn't shock me to see Kish put Mazo on her back either. It's going to be an interesting fight. I just think that ultimately Sabina Mazo's probably got more paths to victory here. And she's the fighter that's making those huge developments fight after fight. I'm picking Sabina Mazo to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of On the Moneyline. I hope you all enjoyed it, and once again guys, I'd appreciate all likes to the video and subscriptions to the MMAPlay365 YouTube channel too. Remember, you can get all the betting advice you'll ever need over at MMAPlay365.com. We cater for long-term gamblers that like to build their own bets and strategies, gamblers that just want to follow exactly what I bet on, and we also cater for you fun gamblers that like the fun long shot parlays, or ACCAs as we call them in the UK. And we also support the DraftKings and FanDuel players with our daily fantasy sports content too. And that comes with our very own private chat room, so you can chat to our expert throughout each fight week. We have plenty of different packages and subscription options for you guys to choose from, and they're all at very affordable prices too. Just hop on to MMAplay365.com and see what's best for you. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you at the next event.